But this choice may be a gift to Donald Trump of a massive 49-state landslide.
The other day I saw this tweet from this sports guy named David Hookstead, where he compared Tucker Carlson's ratings to those of the NBA playoffs. Hookstead wrote, Tucker Carlson had 4.9 million viewers for his Monday night show. The most watched NBA game of the night had 2.8 million viewers. The numbers aren't even close. America loves Tucker. The problem for David Hookstead and all the conservatives who are all giddy about these numbers is that these numbers are obviously made up. They are pure propaganda. Frankly, it's so obvious that I'm embarrassed for them. You see, television ratings come from the Nielsen Corporation. The way this company measures ratings is that they pay families to hook up this device to their TV or cable box, which tracks what they're watching, when they're watching it, and for how long. The company then extrapolates those numbers based on their demographic information and estimates how many people in total were watching a given program. Here's the thing though, I've never met a Nielsen family. In fact, I don't know anyone who's ever met a Nielsen family. So obviously they're just fabricating those numbers. On the other hand, everyone I know, including people who don't watch much basketball, including people who are conservatives, were all watching the Milwaukee Bucks game, and not Tucker Carlson. I'd like to know how the pro-Tucker people explain that. Obviously, the Nielsen ratings are pro-Tucker propaganda, plain and simple. Okay, so in case it wasn't obvious, I was being ironic. Just because I've never met a Nielsen family doesn't mean they don't exist. And I happen to live in an area where there are lots of Bucks fans. And since they were good this year, there were inevitably a number of bandwagon fans. That's all true, but it would be ridiculous to assume that broad national trends correspond with my narrow personal experiences. I bring this up because these are literally some of the same exact arguments about how the 2020 election polls are wrong. For what it's worth, I not only know people who have been called by pollsters, I've been called by them myself. Multiple times, in fact. A month and a half ago, I made a video about how Trump was currently losing. The point of that video was not to make a prediction that Trump was toast and that Biden was definitely going to win. The video was mostly a defense of polling in and of itself. I think polls are the best way to gauge public opinion when it comes to elections. And since Biden is leading in the polls, I think he's going to win. Since that video, the numbers have changed slightly in some key battleground states in a way that favors Trump, but Biden still has the lead in most of them. Pointing this out is not Trump derangement syndrome, as some of you have suggested. Before I continue, I want to talk about another old video of mine, the one about Anna Kasparian quitting TYT. Trust me, though this might not seem related, you'll understand the relevance before too long. A couple of months ago, somebody asked me via my Patreon page if I stood by my prediction that Anna was going to quit TYT. My answer at the time was no, I don't think she's going to. It seems like she has dug herself out of that slump and recommitted herself to Jank's cause.
HGTV is looking for their next furniture rehab and home makeover host, and they make you an offer for a 1-year contract, but it's for $1 less than you make now. Do you leave to go work for HGTV?
No. What?
No?
That was an easy question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I thought it was your passion. Okay, would you rather be able to
No, this is my passion. This is my passion. You
Okay.
think I'm doing this for fun? This is my passion. Jesus.
If you look through the comments section on that video, you'll see tons of TYT fans saying,
Well, this video didn't age well.
I absolutely love it when people make disparaging comments on a video and they reveal that they either didn't watch the whole thing or they weren't paying close attention. Because, if you remember correctly, I laid down a specific condition that I thought would push her over the edge. She has her doubts, she just needs that extra push. In particular, I believe that if Donald Trump gets reelected, which I expect will happen at this point, she'll be gone after the election. I guess we'll find out. As far as Anna goes, I think she may have re-entered her dip.
And it's tough. It's tough to do this job. I'm just being 100% honest with you guys. It's so demoralizing to do this job every day. And nothing changes, ever. Same stories, different players. Anyway, all right. Well, let's talk about Richard Neal.
Well, hopefully we're changing some minds. That's my positive spin.
Yeah, I know. I've been changing minds for 13 and a half years. I'm sure it's been great.
I know. That's my attempt. I try sometimes.
I know. Thank you, Emma. You don't have, but like, no one has to try to make me feel better. It is what it is. This is the reality. Like, I don't need anyone to tell me anything to try to make me feel like what I do is actually worth it. But let's just move on and talk about Richard Neal. And by the way, thank you for being members.
Oh my God. Jesus.
No, but Emma, come on. I don't know how much longer I can pretend like I feel like I'm making a difference. right? I don't feel that way. The country has gotten significantly worse since 2007. Significantly worse.
She seems to understand the futility of TYT's mission. In other words, I'm back on board. If Trump wins re-election, I believe she will quit her job. The reason I bring this up, other than to shoehorn in Anna for some good old-fashioned clickbait, is that you'll notice that I've changed my position on something else. At the time, I said Trump was going to win. I made that video back in May of 2019, a full 18 months away from the presidential election. There were some polls at the time about prospective races, but I don't even remember what they said, and it doesn't really matter. Polling 18 months out means nothing. If they were predictive at that point, the 2008 election would have been a race between Hillary Clinton and Rudy Giuliani. At the time, I thought that Trump was going to win because he's the incumbent, and incumbents are usually re-elected. My opinions on Trump as a man and as a president were the same then as they are now. In other words, my belief that he's going to lose is not driven by Trump derangement syndrome. It's because the best data available suggests that's the outcome. Though if he does win, I look forward to your comments saying,
Well, it looks like this video didn't age well.
is it possible that I'm just deluding myself? Sure, I can't dismiss that scenario outright. It could be true that Trump is actually winning, and I don't see it because of my dislike for him. It certainly wouldn't be the first time I let my emotions cloud my rational faculties. But to you Trump supporters out there, I want you to consider the possibility that maybe you're the ones fooling yourselves. Is it possible that maybe, just maybe, you only doubt the efficacy of polling because your guy is consistently behind in them? That's certainly the case with Trump himself. No one gloats more about polls when he's ahead in them.
I mean, you look at my poll numbers now, I think I've done great in the debates. According to every online poll, I've won every debate.
And yet when he's behind, they're fake.
You still have more than 100 days to this election, but at this point, you're losing.
First of all, I'm not losing because those are fake polls. They were fake in 2016, and now they're even more fake.
The best case I've heard for the idea that Trump is underperforming in the polls is the concept of the shy Trump voter. People who are planning on voting for Trump, but are unwilling to report this to pollsters for a number of reasons. Apparently, there are people who do lie to pollsters.
In fact, Donald Trump's general aggregate approval rating is pretty low, and head-to-head with Joe Biden, his polls aren't doing so well. I can give you 1,000,001 reasons to suggest that Donald Trump is going to lose if you look at the mainstream media. But it's all been a big mistake. This is not the issue that Americans care about. A new poll came out just within the past week or so, showing that about 2/3 of people lie to pollsters.
No, it's not 66% of people. He's referencing a Hill-Harris-X survey, which found that 66% of people believe that other people lie to pollsters. That's just a reminder not to get your information from Tim Pool. There is, however, a new study conducted by Cloud Research LLC, which suggests that Republicans and independents are more than twice as likely to lie to pollsters as Democrats are. The study found that 11.7% of Republicans and 10.5% of independents were not truthful on phone surveys, compared to just 5.1% of Democrats. The number one reason cited for dishonesty was a lack of trust in phone polls to be truly anonymous. Fear of retaliation for expressing an unpopular opinion is a very real thing. According to The Hill, these shy Trump voters split 2-1 in Trump's favor. On net, this translates to a hidden 3% Trump bump. This is just for national numbers, though. Studies conducted in swing states are forthcoming. Those numbers could very well be different. So if we run a crude experiment where we assume that 3% is the correct number nationally as well as in the swing states, and we grant Trump those numbers in the RCP averages, we get a map that looks like this. Biden still wins a close race of 290 electoral votes to 248. Not exactly the 49-state landslide that a certain beanie-wearing journalist has predicted. There's nothing implausible about this outcome. And yes, I'm now much more open to the idea that Trump is being underrepresented in the polls thanks to this Cloud Research study, as it's the first piece of persuasive evidence that significant numbers of shy Trump voters exist. I would love to see what polling experts have to say about this, but thus far I really haven't seen a whole lot about this. I also do have my skepticism about it. It is a study about people who are not accurately self-reporting that is based on self-reporting. The study was conducted online but was specifically about phone polls. I don't know if that's an important distinction. Maybe that makes it more trustworthy, I guess we'll see. That said, this is infinitely more persuasive than anything anecdotal. In fact, even if election polls are entirely useless, this still doesn't make anecdotal evidence in any way predictive of outcomes. It doesn't matter how many of Tim Pool's friends are now voting for Trump who otherwise wouldn't. It doesn't matter how many Trump yard signs Charlie Kirk sees in California. It doesn't matter how many boats there are in the Trump boat parade. And it doesn't matter how many Twitter followers the president has. I had these exact same arguments with Bernie Sanders supporters earlier this year when they insisted that Bernie was actually the most popular Democratic candidate because he had the biggest rallies. Well, according to a 2012 study conducted by Pew Research, only about 10% of Americans reported having attended a political speech or rally. Bear in mind, this number may be lower now. This study was conducted during the Obama years, and no one had bigger rallies than Barack Obama. Meanwhile, about 60% of eligible voters participated in the presidential election that year. In other words, those who are outspoken politically are not representative of the voting public as a whole. I assume we'd see similar numbers for people who put up yard signs, place bumper stickers on their cars, post political stuff on social media, or any other outward demonstration of political opinion. The moment you realize most people don't wear their politics on their sleeve is the moment you appreciate that anecdotal evidence is in no way predictive. Either way, I'm happy to concede that it's entirely possible that Trump supporters are being underrepresented in the polls. I will continue to watch that space, and I will adjust my position accordingly. The one idea I cannot abide by is the notion that the polls are rigged. There's this idea out there that the polls aren't just wrong, but that the organizations that conduct them are deliberately skewing the results. So many people I run into think that the polls are just another form of propaganda. Before I get into why this doesn't make sense on any level, I need to make a point that should be obvious but apparently isn't. A poll getting something wrong is not proof that it was skewed. Polls are a flawed method of gauging public opinion, and they do incorrectly predict outcomes from time to time. It's not surprising, they are made by humans after all. Being wrong does not prove a conspiracy. A poll could be off by 40 points, and that wouldn't prove malice on any level. Never ascribe to conspiracy that which can be blamed on incompetence. If we just look at this election, considering that the vast majority of polls have Biden ahead, this would be an enormous conspiracy that would require quite a bit of coordination. It would also mean that Fox News is secretly supporting Biden, since he's ahead in their polls as well. Now, leave aside that there's no evidence of that. There's not even any good reason in theory why a polling company would do that. There's simply no incentive. In fact, there are very powerful incentives for them not to do that. The explanation that I hear most commonly from Trump supporters is that the pollsters want to make it look like a Biden victory is inevitable, so as to discourage Trump supporters and depress his turnout while creating a bandwagon effect for Biden. Given that, weirdly enough, there are people who vote for the candidate they think is going to win, both of these reasons initially seem plausible. Of course, this strategy could just as easily backfire. If Biden is seen as inevitable, it could depress his turnout as well. Trump voters are way more enthusiastic to vote for their candidate than Biden voters are to vote for theirs. And Trump voters are also a lot more skeptical of the severity of COVID-19. In other words, Trump voters are likely to show up regardless of the state of the race. But if would-be Biden voters think that they've got it in the bag, many of them might not bother to wait in line potentially for hours during a pandemic to cast a ballot when they believe that the outcome is basically decided. Joe Biden himself seems to be aware of this. Back in June, when he was up by even more against Trump, he encouraged his supporters to ignore the polls and register to vote. But just the other day on his Facebook page, Biden showed a poll where he was losing in Michigan. The former vice president obviously believes that it's in his best interest to drive home the idea that the race is currently close, so as to keep a sense of urgency with his supporters. Obviously, Biden wants to win, but being far ahead in the polls doesn't necessarily serve the interests of his campaign. It also doesn't serve the interests of the polling companies either. Don't get me wrong, there are some fly-by-night organizations that produce polls from time to time, but most of our election data comes from well-known, established institutions. A scientific opinion poll takes a lot of work and can cost tens of thousands of dollars to conduct. Polling organizations don't always get paid to do polls on national elections. So why do they do them? Well, they're essentially a form of advertising. Polling organizations typically make money by conducting analytics for businesses and other organizations. So if you were running a business and you wanted to get analytics on, say, customer preferences, would you hire a pollster that gets things wrong or one that gets them right? These organizations live and die based on their reputation for accuracy. So getting things wrong can cost them money and have real-world consequences. On Jonah Goldberg's podcast, Republican pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson explained that this is exactly what happened to Gallup, which is why the best-known pollster in the country has scaled back their political forecasting.
Gallup is a little more out of the business of political polling these days.
Is that right?
Yeah, this is a big shift. Gallup has been doing kind of daily tracking on presidential job approval going back decades, and they're really scaling their political stuff back. So right now...
Why? Do you know why?
I think part of it is that Gallup has a business model where they do a lot of corporate consulting.
Uh-huh.
And after the 2012 election, I mean, they said, on election day, they said Romney 49, Obama 48. And that was kind of a big, whoa, let's figure out what we're doing.
I remember
here.
that. Yeah.
And if you've got corporate clients, the risk of being wrong is big. And there's no other item in the world of public opinion research where you are held so accountable as things like a ballot test measure.
Right.
If I'm doing a project for a corporate client and I find out that 60% of Americans think red M&Ms is the best, and I go and advise my client for whatever they need to know that 60% of M&M, if the real answer is that actually 55% of Americans think red M&Ms are their favorite, I'm probably not getting fired from that project. Ideally, you want to be getting it right as a pollster. But if you say you're going to win with 60% of the vote and instead you get 55% and the margin is much closer, and then there's consequences for that. So I think that's just Gallup moving more to a consulting model and wanting to get out of the business of potentially being publicly wrong.
When I talk to people who insist that the polls are propaganda, most of them are absolutely positive that Trump is going to win. If that's true, then what's the end game for the pollsters? To crank out a bunch of BS numbers only to be embarrassed on election day? Of course, their explanation, as I said earlier, is that polling is a propaganda effort to make it look like Trump is losing in hopes that that perception will eventually become reality. As I mentioned in a previous video, many conservatives believed this in 2012. So when Obama won, what was their reaction? They could have doubled down and claimed that Obama's victory was proof that the propaganda effort worked. The pollsters were able to effectively discourage Romney voters from showing up by convincing them that Obama had an insurmountable lead. Instead, to their credit, they admitted that they were the ones who were wrong. As Breitbart editor John Nolte wrote, not only did the Real Clear Politics poll of polls end up being almost perfectly precise, but the most accurate pollster of the 2012 election cycle ended up being the Daily Kos's public policy polling. My guys, Gallup and Rasmussen, didn't even make the top 20. Democrats were able to do this during a year in which it seemed enthusiasm would all be on our side. Monday, we were 100% sure this was reality. We certainly weren't alone in this belief, but we were wrong. Not the polls, not Nate Silver, not Chuck Todd, not anyone in the media. So why did they admit they were wrong? Something that is not easy to do, believe me I know, when they could have, in theory anyways, claimed to have been vindicated. I suspect it's because it became obvious at that point that they were the ones deluding themselves. There's also parsimony. Which explanation of events seems more likely? There was a gigantic conspiracy involving the vast majority of polling organizations in an effort to generate enthusiasm for Barack Obama, and that this effort worked, or that the polls were right and the people who doubted them were fooling themselves. The answer to me seems obvious. So, to you Trumpers who doubt the polls, I ask you this. Is it possible that maybe, just maybe, you're the ones fooling yourselves? Is it possible that Biden is leading in the polls because he's actually winning right now? Is it possible that you just don't want it to be true, so you've convinced yourself that it isn't? In 2016, most experts and elites arrogantly thought Donald Trump had no chance of winning, and they were embarrassed on election night. You probably think about that when experts now say that Biden is going to win. But is it possible that maybe you're the one on the wrong side of the equation this time around? I'm certainly open to the possibility that I'm wrong, but I do have the data on my side as of now. I'll continue to rely on the polls while also taking them with a healthy grain of salt, because even though they're imperfect, they're still the best means of forecasting an election. And if they change, which they may well, I'll adjust my position accordingly. If after all the votes are counted, and they prove to be way off, by all means, feel free to come back here and say,
well, this video didn't age well.